crashes, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis, Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts with host David Lamb and the attorneys of Hollis, Wright.
Good evening and welcome into the attorneys. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I got an interesting topic of conversation. We'll get to the experts in just a moment, make those introductions. But before we do so, some ground rules of how you can be a part of our show. At the bottom of the screen, there are ways you can call, text, email, get in touch with us. Would love for you to do so. Also, Hollis Wright makes available each and every Sunday evening during the show attorneys from the firm who are standing by live to speak with you. So that's a free off-air and confidential conversation. It's a neat opportunity, again, that Hollis Wright makes available during every show. So if a question pops into your mind, you want to speak to an actual attorney, they're standing by, so take advantage of that opportunity. Leading our conversation, he is the managing partner of Hollis Wright. He's been practicing law some 23 years, I hear.
Yes.
You've got this figured out then.
Yes, I'm definitely aging myself on this show.
So 23 years practicing law, nearly 500 shows.
Yep.
This is a topic that we're talking about tonight. We've kind of been down this road before.
Well, we've been down this road before in the context of product liability-based lawsuits.
Okay.
Where in our firm is handled, and there are firms around the state that handle gun defect cases. But I'm not sure that we've ever done an actual show just directly related to gun defects, which is kind of the topic today. We are very lucky today to have Matt Garmon from Haynes, an awesome law firm here in town, an old historic law firm that's been around for many years and had some incredible lawyers still at the firm and that have been through the firm as leaders among trial lawyers in our state bar. Just an awesome firm. So Matt, first of all, we're super excited to have you on. You're at an awesome firm, and I respect and like these guys a lot.
Yeah. Well,
so welcome on.
thank you for having me.
I heard, or actually read, we get the material beforehand, at least related to the topic. And so I did some research to get prepared for the show. One of the interesting stats that Matt gave to us that I thought was just eye-opening is there are more guns in the United States than there are people.
Right.
That's hard to believe.
Right.
So what's the stat there?
Yeah, so there are 393 million civilian-owned firearms, so not even counting law enforcement. So you could arm every man, woman, and child in the United States, and you would still have 68 million guns left over.
Goodness.
I mean, that's how popular guns are in the United States.
How did you get in this area? And, I know you've got some lawyers at your firm that you work with in this area, but how did you get involved in gun defects, just kind of generally?
Sure. So I've been involved with gun defect cases from, the time that I started with our firm with Haynes. But, I can't take all the credit. My law partner, Todd Wheelis, he got the first gun case our firm had in about 2005. A man came in who had purchased a pistol, new from a store. The pistol was dropped, it hit the ground and fired, and the bullet hit this gentleman and hurt him really badly. And so we took the case, and we found out that the gun would fire if it was dropped, that the company had done no safety testing whatsoever, and that the company knew that the gun would fire if it was dropped. Which was always striking to me because it goes to foreseeability that we talk about in the law a lot. You think about your things you drop. How many times during the week do you drop your keys? How many times do you drop the remote? I've got my cell phone in my pocket. It's those things are expensive. I try not to drop it, but I still drop it despite my best efforts. And so guns are the same way. People drop them, and firearm manufacturers, if they know that can happen, then they should prevent it. Yeah. So we had that one case, and now, 15 years later,
the rest is history.
The rest is history.
So talk to me a little bit about this industry, because I know there's some, if you will, uniquities to the gun industry where they are not regulated in the same way, and guns are not evaluated in the same way as they are in general the products world, whether it's auto, whether it's household appliances, whatever, from a product perspective case. What's different about this industry?
Sure. So a lot of people don't know this, but guns, firearms, and ammunition, they are the only products that have no safety requirements, no safety testing is required, and they can't be recalled. There's no state or federal government entity that can recall guns or ammunition. And the reason for that is it's really political. In the 70s, Congress started the Consumer Product Safety Commission. The whole idea was to make sure that consumer products, anything that you could buy at a store, that those were safe. Yeah. There was one Congress member from Michigan who didn't want firearms and ammunition to be included in that. So he blocked the legislation that would have included firearms and ammo in '72, and then he blocked it again in 1975. And despite many people that are injured and some people who are killed by defective firearms every year, Congress has really never considered it again since the 70s.
Now, it's fair to say that just because that industry is not regulated the way that a household product would be or an automobile would be, doesn't mean that the manufacturers of these products don't self-regulate themselves insofar as it relates to testing, meaning there are some companies out there that have very extensive tests that try and prevent this type of stuff, are there not?
Yeah, it's like firearms are like most things. There's some manufacturers who do a better job than others. Yeah. Some manufacturers who make products that are safer than others. But yeah, the industry basically is supposed to regulate itself. And unless there are a couple states, Massachusetts and California, that have drop testing in those two states to make sure the gun won't fire if it's dropped. But even in those states, the manufacturer gets to choose what company does the testing for them. So yeah, it's largely self-regulated.
What do you ask for example, in litigation? What are you, because for example, in a traditional product suit that involves, let's just call it a household appliance, a pressure cooker that doesn't work correctly and it explodes and causes burn injuries. We've seen cases like that over the years. We will ask the Consumer Product Administration to provide us testing material and information related to previous injuries. What do? Do you go to the company and say, look, we want all of your material based on your testing? Is that how you have to get it?
Yeah, normally that's the way. So once the lawsuit has been filed, we have to file the lawsuit and then get into what's called discovery and ask for those documents. And normally we'll ask for design specifications, manufacturing specifications, any testing that the company did. And it's hard to believe, but a lot of times there was no testing because it's not required. And then we'll compare what, say, this negligent manufacturer did to what other good manufacturers do. In a lot of drop fire cases, for instance, Glock is kind of the gold standard. And we'll say, okay, well, Glock, they have these different kinds of safeties. They do this different kind of testing. Negligent manufacturer, did you do that?
Yeah.
So a lot of times because it's not heavily regulated, you have to compare what the negligent company did with what a better company
did. To basically create what an industry standard is.
Right.
It's interesting.
Exactly.
All right, so we got to go to break.
We do.
When we come back from break, I want to go through some examples. Matt's got some examples of some defects that he's seen that have contributed to lawsuits over the years, with some pictures and maybe a video that we'll be able to talk about.
Good. Let's head to our first break of the evening. Stay tuned. More of the attorneys coming right back.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright, a personal injury law firm, and thank you for watching The Attorneys. We hope you, a friend, or a loved one never needs legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple: to provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free and off air. So if you have questions specific to the show or related to other accident or injury topics, call, email, or text us. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, or go to hollis-wright.com and click on the Contact Us button. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us and watching The Attorneys.
The attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis, Wright, are here to serve you.
When we started the show 8 years ago, my hope was we would be able to do what we do best, which is to help people answer real-world legal-related issues they have in their life.
People oftentimes are confronting various legal issues and problems in their lives that range across the gamut of legal practice areas. Bankruptcy, criminal law, family law, just to name a few. And to be able to have a 30-minute platform or format to where we can just cover various legal topics once a week, that's obviously the primary focus of the show.
That we would be able to use the resources of the many lawyers we have at this law firm to create a plan that had a lasting impact that also gave back to the community at the same time. And I think we've done just that with the attorneys.
Welcome back into the attorneys talking about gun defects. Would love to have you join our conversation at the bottom of the screen. How you can call, text, email. Also, attorneys from Hollis, Wright standing by live to speak with you. Our guest tonight, Matt Garmon. A question I've got for you. So, seeing a bunch of these cases, what kind of defects do you most commonly see in your cases?
Yeah. So typically we group defective firearms kind of into two categories. One category of defect is where the gun or the rifle, the shotgun, will fire without the trigger being pulled. That's one category. And then the other category is when the firearm doesn't meet the expectations of the consumer. And I can kind of break down those two categories. So, for instance, with guns that will fire without the trigger being pulled, if you look at picture number one, you can kind of, this is a Ruger Black Hawk revolver, 41 caliber. As you'll see from this picture, there's a red arrow pointing to a metal piece inside the revolver. It's pointing to the firing pin. Now also you have the hammer that's all the way down. Now the problem with that is when the hammer is all the way down, it's resting on the firing pin, on that little metal piece. That little metal piece is resting on the back of a bullet. So if this revolver is dropped, that hammer will strike that firing pin. It just takes a little bit of force.
Right.
And then that firing pin will hit the back of the bullet and make the gun go bang. So that's one defect that we see a lot with revolvers, where the trigger doesn't have to be pulled. If you look at the second picture, this is a semi-automatic pistol. It's a Taurus PT-609, and we saw the same defect with it, that it would fire if it was dropped without the trigger being pulled. And the reason for that is, as you'll see there in the picture, you see the slide at the top, and then there's the firing pin that's in the slide. When the slide is cocked back and it comes forward, that firing pin is under pressure from a spring. That firing pin is held back by a sear, and the level of engagement, the amount that the sear is holding back the firing pin, it's hundredths of a millimeter. I mean, it's literally the thickness of a human thumbnail. Okay. So when that is dropped, the problem with that is that the trigger will move rearward because of gravity, just like if someone was actually pulling the trigger. And when the trigger moves, all of those internal components move and the gun fires.
So how do the manufacturers solve these issues? I mean, those are two obvious defects, as I would see them, that can create an inadvertent deployment of ammunition. How do the manufacturers solve these issues?
Well, generally with these types of defects, some manufacturers have already solved these problems. Okay. And the problems have been solved for, with the revolver that we looked at in picture one, there's a safety mechanism. It's called a transfer bar. The transfer bar acts as a physical barrier between the hammer and the firing pin that we talked about. And unless you pull the trigger, that transfer bar stays up and acts as a barrier between the hammer and the firing pin. That was invented by a guy named Ivor Johnson back in the early 20th century. Why manufacturers don't include safeties like that? A lot of times, sometimes it's because of cost. If you increase the cost of production, then that affects the bottom line for the manufacturer. So most of the time when those kinds of things are not included, generally we've seen that it's because of cost.
Josh, and they often talk about different products and drugs that are made and all that, and there are some good actors. Most folks do it right, do it the right way, go the extra mile, but there are some bad actors that are taking shortcuts. Is the same true when it comes to these manufacturers? Some just choose to do it the right way, maybe Glock, versus those who kind of have a history of cutting corners?
Yes, that's exactly what we see. There are good actors and there are bad actors. There are companies who do it right the way that they should, and there are companies that don't, that decide to cut corners or put sales over safety. We see that a lot. But because it's not regulated, like we talked about, it really just comes down to the conduct of the company.
Yeah, it's really interesting you asked that question, because I can juxtapose or compare two separate cases that we've evaluated over the years. One where a manufacturer had a safety mechanism that had the transfer bar that prevented the unit from ever inadvertently deploying ammunition if the safety was on, and one did not. The one that did not, they both were significant injuries. The one that did not was a very viable case. The one where the transfer bar had been installed on this unit and designed into the system, they were able to prove in that case, and it didn't get very far because we got our experts involved early to assess it, that there's no way that gun could not have deployed except for the fact that the safety had been turned or taken off or engaged in the off position. And so then it put responsibility back on the user of the gun, given the context and the circumstances of how that happened. He was walking into a field as opposed to he needed to have it on. And so ultimately, a lot of times, two different manufacturers, two different weapons, one that is a much better defense for the defendant than the other, and you see that. Sure. And that's just, it was a much better design. In that case, didn't go far. Now, you've got a video that we're going to show. Tell us a little bit about what this video is.
Sure. So this video that we're about to look at, this is another case involving a Taurus pistol that our firm handled. And what you'll see here is actual drop testing that we did and that our experts did, where we show what will happen when you drop a loaded semi-automatic pistol that has this kind of design. And what you see in the video and what we saw is that when the pistol is dropped, that trigger moves rearward just like it's being pulled by the gun owner, and it fires in exactly the same way. So we saw that time and time again with multiple models that had this type of design.
And just set for us, if you will, before we go to break, you've got two other pictures. I think you've got listed as picture 3 and 4. Tell us a little bit about picture 3, and then let's talk about picture 4.
Sure. So picture 3, this is a 12 gauge shotgun. And this kind of goes into the other area where firearms can be defective, when they don't meet the expectations of the consumer. So this particular shotgun, gentleman was at a dove hunt, had fired rounds through the shotgun earlier in the day, fires a round, and the shotgun, you'll see there in the bottom of that picture, the shotgun explodes. Now obviously, when you buy a shotgun, and when this gentleman bought this shotgun, he did not have the expectation that it would explode. Yeah. Same type of thing with this pistol in picture 4. This is a Taurus PT-738. It was being fired at a gun range. Gun owner pulls the trigger, and as you'll see here at the top of picture 4, the slide is in 2 pieces. So the slide broke into 2 pieces as the gun owner was pulling the trigger. Obviously, when he purchased the pistol, he didn't expect for that to happen. Right. Yeah. So these are some other more catastrophic failures that we see with firearms a lot. Interesting, and I'm sure that cleaning can weigh into that. I mean, there can be some defenses the manufacturers have that you've got to work around. I know we're going to break. When we come back, I want to kind of finish some of these topics. That was super fascinating with 4 pictures in the video, but we got some other topics I want Matt to talk through.
All right, we're headed to break. Stay tuned. The final segment of The Attorney is coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis, Wright. In court, attorneys are not allowed to tell juries certain things. For example, We cannot talk about a defendant's net worth, meaning the defendant's ability, resources, or insurance to pay a verdict. In this week's Legal 4-in-1, we're answering the question, why can't lawyers talk about a defendant's net worth to a jury? Now, Rule 403 of the Alabama Rules of Evidence states, in part, relevant evidence may be excluded if its probative value is substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice. Long-standing Alabama cases have held that the net worth of a defendant falls under this catch-all rule and is to be excluded. The reasoning behind the rule is that if a jury knows a defendant is wealthy, then the jury might award more money to the plaintiff. And this goes one step further. If an attorney makes any remarks that suggest the defendant is responsible because he is wealthy or rich and the plaintiff is poor, that can be grounds for a new trial. If you're ever on a jury, the reality in our state is this. In almost every lawsuit that goes to trial, the attorneys representing both the plaintiff and the defendant have already looked at whether there's sufficient insurance coverage or assets to satisfy a verdict. Most likely, the parties would not pursue a civil lawsuit if damages could not be paid after a jury returns a verdict. So even though lawyers cannot mention the net worth of a defendant during trial, there likely are resources available to pay a verdict in court. Please remember, your call, email, or text to the attorneys is free. All of us at Hollis Wright want to help answer your questions on real issues you face. And remember, a competent lawyer will respond to every question you send in. That's our pledge and promise to you. And as always, thanks for watching The Attorneys right here on WDTN 13.
Welcome back into The Attorneys, talking about gun defects. Just a few minutes remaining, less than 6 minutes remaining. So if you want to take advantage of the opportunity to speak with an attorney from Hollis Wright, you've got less than 6 minutes to do so. Josh?
All right, so Matt, talk with me just a minute, because I know you probably get this in some of your litigation. Because there are not recalls, litigation is generally the way these are handled. Do you get the person or the individual saying you're anti-Second Amendment if you're filing these cases? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, so we always try to make it very clear that these cases are not anti-Second Amendment. They're not anti-gun. They're just anti-bad product. You could bring because the firearms industry is not regulated like we talked about before, the only recourse you have if you've been injured or if you've had a loved one who's been killed is to file a civil lawsuit, which you have the right to do under the 7th Amendment to the Constitution. Generally, most of our clients, and me included, I strongly believe in the Second Amendment. I'm a gun owner. Most of our clients are lifelong NRA members. They're gun owners. They believe in the Second Amendment. And they just want a product that they can buy that will protect them if they need it and protect their family and their children. And what we say is these are just anti-bad product. The thing that you buy to protect yourself, to protect your kids and your family, shouldn't be the very thing that leads to you being injured or being killed.
What is the, you mentioned the second part of the defects, which are that the gun doesn't meet the reasonable expectations of the consumer, and you gave a couple examples in some of your pictures, one of which is a muzzle explodes or does not perform correctly. What are the defenses in those cases that you see from the manufacturer? Is it improper gun hygiene, failure to clean? I mean, what is it generally with those?
I would say in 90% of or a high percentage of the firearms cases that we have, the defense is user error. They will try to the manufacturer will try to find something that the user did that they shouldn't have done. For instance, if the user says they didn't read the manual or they didn't read the manual thoroughly enough, were they wearing safety equipment, safety glasses, hearing protection? Typically, generally, manufacturers, especially ones who make products that are of lower quality, do not want to talk about their product. Yeah. They want to try and reframe it and talk about something else. So generally, they want to try and find something that the gun owner did that maybe they didn't do the best. That's normally what we see.
Yeah, these are pretty hotly contested cases, and they get aggressive in the defense of these cases a lot of times, but a lot of times there is a clear defect where the cases do get resolved one way or the other. I'm assuming you find that experts are required in just about every one of these cases.
Absolutely, absolutely. So generally, we will have one or multiple experts. Normally, the gun will have to be. We use CT scans a lot of times for, especially with pistols. The gun will be CT scanned, and we'll have one or multiple experts who will evaluate, how the parts fit together, what did the manufacturer do, what could they have done better, what are other alternative designs that they should have used that they didn't use. So yeah, those are normally our steps.
It's interesting, David, that in these cases, I had a case of a shotgun that dropped on a front porch, and there was a criminal prosecution ongoing because there was a belief the family member had intentionally shot the gun at another distant family member, and we were able to prove through the defective gun that there was an inadvertent deployment of the gun, and it helped in the criminal case. So a lot of times, those two things can interplay with one another, for sure.
We're just about out of time, but time enough for a final thought from the both of you, and if you would, you go first, man.
Sure. Well, I would just say that I hope that this makes people more aware that accidents where guns fire when they shouldn't, or where you have these catastrophic failures, that these happen way more often than people would think.
Right.
So I just hope maybe this will make people more aware that those things can happen.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate a couple things we talked about today, and that is that these are complicated cases. You can't go it alone. You got to get a lawyer involved, someone like Matt and his firm that handles these type cases, because experts are required. There are just a lot of moving parts in this litigation. And one thing we hadn't really touched on that I would also mention is, if you have been the victim of a gun defect, you want to make sure that you preserve all of the equipment, and that doesn't simply mean the gun. You want to protect and keep the gun to get to your lawyer, ammunition that you may have had, clothes that you were wearing, photographs taken that day. You want to keep all that stuff just to make sure that your lawyer can do a complete evaluation.
Good advice, good tips.
Good job. Thanks for being on.
Thank you for having me.
Being with us, and appreciate you being with us as well. We appreciate it each and every week, and we'll look for you next time right here on The Attorneys.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.